Good morning. My name is Dr. Brian Caputo. I am the president of College of DuPage, and I am delighted to welcome you to Constitution Day, a reminder of how civic responsibility plays a vital role in our lives. College of DuPage is proud to host this annual event that celebrates a document that details the framework for our country. It was signed on September 17, 1787, and remains to this day both relevant and powerful. Its importance to students cannot be underestimated. The College Board, a national nonprofit organization that runs the SAT exam, said that the two most important skills that students should master for success are computer science and an understanding of the Constitution. The theme for this year's Constitution Day at COD is voting laws, suppression, or avoiding fraud. The portions of the Constitution affected include the 15th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, and 26th Amendments. These address the rights of citizens to vote regardless of gender and race, as well as lowering the voting age to 18. In addition, the theme also covers Article 1 and Article 2 of the Constitution, which detail the legislative and executive branches of our government. A distinguished panel will examine this year's theme, and I thank the members for taking their time to join us today. Voting is our civic duty, and we must ensure that students have appropriate access to cast their votes. This strengthens our collective voice as we select leaders to represent our diverse society. Understanding how our government works is crucial to its effectiveness and for our society to thrive. Hosting this annual Constitution Day celebration is an opportunity to learn and engage in thoughtful discussion. It also helps us separate our political views from our constitutional views. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be an engaging and thought-provoking presentation.
Welcome to Constitution Day 2021. My name is Mark Rudisill. I am the Interim Dean of Social and Behavioral Sciences and the Library Division at College of DuPage. Constitution Day offers an opportunity to discuss and examine our Constitution regardless of political views. The Social and Behavioral Sciences and Library Division is happy to bring this programming forward, along with other partners in the college, such as the Office of the President, the Center for Student Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, area libraries, and community members, as well as our COD students. Each year, a different topic is explored, and this year's topic is voting laws. Voting laws are founded in our Constitution and various amendments added to the Constitution. Voting rights and laws have gone through many changes and challenges since the signing of our Constitution in 1787. Key amendments pertaining to voting law changes are the 15th Amendment guarantees the right of citizens to vote and cannot be denied based on color, race, or previous servitude. The 19th Amendment granted women's suffrage, allowing women the right to vote. The 23rd Amendment provided presidential electors for the District of Columbia. The 24th Amendment eliminated the poll tax as a requirement for voting in federal elections. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. Our discussion on voting laws features a guest panel to share their intellect and opinions, and we welcome this year's panelists for this bipartisan and informational event. Please welcome our distinguished guests and enjoy this day to celebrate our Constitution.
Welcome. I'm Robert Moorhead, Associate Professor of Sociology at the College of DuPage, and I welcome you to our Constitution Day event. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce our Constitution Day committee, my talented colleagues who put out so much work into putting this event together. I'm going to include Taya Forrest in Justice Studies, Sally Fairbanks in our paralegal program, Christine Kickles in the library, Stephanie Quirk in Student Life, Jennifer Charles in Conference and Event Planning, and Joan DePiro and Amy Fries in Marketing. I also want to go over a few key housekeeping rules regarding our event for today. So all of our participants will be muted with their cameras off. All the members, not members of the panel, but members of the community who are joining us. Our chat is open. You are welcome to chat with your fellow participants. Please submit your questions using the Q&A button. Our panelists will take questions at the end of the discussion. Our presentation is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. A link will be emailed to registered attendees within a week of the event. And to ensure a clear transcription, closed captioning will be available on the recording of the event. Also, a few guidelines regarding our discussion today. We ask that everyone communicate with courtesy and respect, to treat other people as you would in a face-to-face professional setting. Speak from the heart and listen from the heart. To challenge yourself to listen to others' perspectives and be tolerant towards others' perspectives, respectfully disagreeing when maybe your opinions don't align. I also want to give people a heads up regarding some upcoming events going on at the college. On September 17th at 12 p.m., Professor Julia Giliberti will be presenting Listening to My Rights, Music, Social Justice, and Voting Rights. That'll be in MAC 140 on the COD campus. And coming up on Tuesday, September 28th, we'll be celebrating National Voter Registration Day with a virtual voter registration drive. This will be hosted by COD Votes and the Student Leadership Council. There's information on the event that's coming up for on Tuesday, September 28th for National Voter Registration Day. And if you have your phone handy, you can click on that. You can point your camera at that QR code on the side of the screen there to get more information, or go to the website cod.edu/codvotes. And I also want to take this opportunity to introduce the panelists that we have. We have Jean Kasmerick, the DuPage County Clerk, Matt Dietrich, the Illinois State Board of Elections, Ami Gandhi from Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Jim Madigan, retired Deputy Director of the Oak Park Library. And joining us for the Q&A section of the event will be Jessica Stachniak, Election Division Voter Registration Manager for DuPage County. And at this moment, I'd like to hand the mic over to Matt Dietrich to introduce one of our panelists.
Hi, I'm Matt Dietrich from the State Board of Elections. And in Illinois, elections and voter registration are conducted by 108 election authorities. They're the ones who actually set up the polling places and actually take in and register all voters. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Jean Kasmerick. She is the county clerk of DuPage County, which is the third largest voting jurisdiction in Illinois with more than 626,000 voters. And so, Jean, why don't you tell our audience what it is your office does and how it is that you facilitate the election process.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. My office handles a variety of crucial services, including licenses, vital records, and tax revenue. As of January 15th, 2019, 6 weeks after I took office, we have been conducting the electoral process in DuPage County. Prior to that date, elections had been administered in this county by an election commission for 45 years. Elections consume the bulk of my days and nights and weekends. Today, I'm in my office located in the 421 County Farm Road Administration Building in Wheaton, the county seat. I'm surrounded and humbled by suffragette artwork depicting Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Carrie Chapman Catt, Ida B. Wells, DuPage's own Ellen Martin, and my personal hero, Alice Paul. These ladies keep me on my toes and serve as a constant reminder of how I got here and the unfinished work which remains. I also have a gentleman here watching me out of the corner of my eye, Representative John Lewis, commanding me to protect the vote. Yes, sir. All of you are welcome to this office, which actually belongs to you, the citizens of DuPage County. We're extremely lucky to live in a state where basic voter protection laws are strong. I don't wish to steal Matt's thunder, so I won't elaborate. However, you must realize that disenfranchisement in other states can dilute your votes here for federal offices. Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Now, because Illinois is in good shape at this moment in history, doesn't mean that because these laws exist, they're not tested. It's not uncommon for our office to receive calls about an election judge who's gone rogue by demanding IDs on election day. First, let's clear up the definition between election fraud and voter fraud. Election fraud is the deliberate and illegal interference with the electoral process, including spreading misinformation about election dates and polling locations, a campaign tossing away voter registration applications, and illegal activity related to the counting and certification of election results. Voter fraud, on the other hand, is illegal behavior of individual voters, such as duplicate voting, a non-citizen voting, or impersonating another voter. By the way, I'm not a lawyer. I only play one on TV. It should concern all of us that so much emphasis is placed on preventing voter fraud, which is virtually non-existent in this office and elsewhere, while more widespread election fraud, which impacts millions, isn't given enough attention. Why is our country fixing a problem which isn't a problem? And likewise, why isn't our country fixing a problem which is a problem? Today, I will draw attention to a key target of restrictive laws and bills beyond our state border: voting by mail. In May 2020, Illinois enacted SB 1863, emergency election legislation to address the pandemic during a presidential year predicted to have high voter turnout. Provisions included a significant increase in mail voting to allow citizens to vote safely from home. In other words, voting became easy. Many states joined Illinois with vigorous mail voting programs. Thanks to the CARES Act, special funding distributed through the Illinois State Board of Elections, thank you, Matt, and bipartisan funding support of the county board, DuPage was able to go above and beyond with purchasing a mail sorter to process ballots. We snatched up one of the last ones available, and sending out mail applications to every registered voter in the summer of 2020. Does this look familiar to anyone? Came from our office. We were also able to provide free postage on all ballot return envelopes. We purchased additional equipment, set new procedures in place, enhanced physical security and chain of custody, and prepared for that avalanche from the post office. We were all set with our pandemic voting solution. But then I'm sure I'm going to be letting down the participating scholars with this next phrase: weird stuff began to happen. A loud and aggressive message was coming out that everything surrounding mail ballots could not be trusted. There was this fresh assumption that the post office couldn't facilitate mail ballots. Of course, it could, but it was nevertheless out there. The mythology worked. Instead of dropping ballots in a mailbox near their homes, voters would drive miles from the four corners of the county to place them in the outdoor ballot drop box. At times, a line of cars wrapped all around the parking lot. Or Voters would walk their mail ballots into our office or into early voting polling sites, which seemed to defeat the entire purpose of voting safely from home. Keep in mind that voters were offered tracking for their mail ballots and could also check their ballot status online. I repeated if your mail ballot arrived in your mailbox in a timely manner, it is proof that the post office is working just fine line until I was hoarse. Logic and reasoning were no match to the noise machine. On the first day of what we call in our office early voting, which began 40 days prior to the election, I received a call at 6 a.m. that voters were starting to line up outside the poll with multiple TV stations, vans, and trucks lining up. And by the time I arrived, the line of voters had grown to maybe, eighth of a mile. I had never seen anything like it. Normally, there's no line at all for voting at this stage in the cycle. When the polling place opened, many voters were telling judges that they had applied for a mail ballot but preferred to cancel it out to instead vote in person. Why were seniors and the elderly and disabled people standing in line for an hour or two in the hot sun when they could simply vote by mail from their kitchen table? We did our best to make polling places safe with plexiglass, masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, and social distancing, but I was terrified it wasn't enough protection. Vaccines wouldn't be available for months. I wondered if at any point the headline would be that a DuPage polling place had been designated a super spreader. Fodder for my nightmares. Thousands who had originally applied for a mail ballot were changing their minds, stating that they heard mail ballots would not be counted. At that point, things started coming out of my mouth like over my dead body, only I may have been a tad more dramatic. This psychological suppression was taking place before my very eyes. All the press releases, videos, social media, and multiple public Zoom gatherings our office was generating couldn't stop the freight train. The photo of me happily dropping my mail ballot into a post office mailbox didn't seem to soothe anyone's fears. Voters had this fierce determination to have a tangible voting experience. Despite the pandemic and despite the misinformation surrounding mail ballots in 2020, DuPage had the highest turnout in history in 2020 of 491,000. Over 181,000 citizens voted by mail. Mail voting worked. And therein lies the clue for why some states are targeting mail ballots with restrictive laws. Meanwhile, out of nearly 500,000 voters, there were only maybe 24 applications sent to the DuPage State's Attorney's Office for review. Most of those flagged applications were dismissed. I would guess that election agencies across the country shared our experience. Yet mail voting is being restricted by thousands, if not millions of voters because of the actions of a tiny handful of voters, which most likely did not change results. On that delightful note, I now turn back to Matt Dietrich. Matt, tell us about the work you and your office do for the election process.
Thank you, Jean. Well, as I said earlier, we don't conduct the elections. We don't set up polling places, and people don't register to vote directly with us. All of that is done by the 108 local election authorities, which are 102 county clerks and 6 municipal boards of election. What we do is we act as an administrative help, an administrative aid to those 108 election authorities. We have 3 main divisions that serve this purpose. The first is we have a division of campaign disclosure. We're responsible for enforcing the Campaign Finance Act. Campaign committees have to file paperwork with us. They have to report all their contributions and expenditures to us. We regulate that. Our second main division is the Voting and Registration Systems Division. And that division's primary role is the testing of voting equipment and systems that are used by local election authorities. They have to meet federal standards first, then they get tested by us to make sure they meet our standards. That division also oversees, make sure that the proper pre-testing before every election happens, and post-election, we conduct a 5% statewide random retabulation to make sure that all votes are counted accurately. The third main division of ours is the Election Operations Division. And that is probably, for the purposes of our discussion today, the most relevant division. They handle candidate filings that are done here in our office in Springfield for all state level candidates and all judges throughout Illinois. They also produce publications such as our Candidates Guide that helps candidates for office know how to properly file their paperwork. Our election calendars are published by them. They also provide guides to local election authorities to assist them in their conduct of the election. They also provide election judge training for a lot of the counties who don't have staffs large enough to conduct their own judge trainings. So the Election Operations Division is probably the most direct interface with our local election authorities as far as conducting the actual election goes. The other thing that the Election Operations Division has had to do in the last year and a half is provide guidance as new laws come out of Springfield from the General Assembly. State Board of Elections does not write election laws. That's all done by the lawmakers at the state capitol. What we saw in 2020, as Clerk Kasmerick referred to, was in June of 2020, a very substantial election bill came out of the legislature, was signed into law by Governor Pritzker, that addressed the pandemic. And the main functions of that were to, number one, of course, expand vote by mail. Number two, to provide the use of drop boxes in addition to mailboxes if someone wanted to vote by mail but didn't want to put their ballot in with the Postal Service, they could drop them off there. Our Election Operations Division was required by law to draft guidelines for any election jurisdiction that wanted to use drop boxes. For example, where to place them, types of security around them, how often they needed to be checked and emptied and ballots removed, that type of thing. Another main provision of that new law from last year was allowing drive-through voting, curbside voting it was called, and that was for voters who didn't want to leave their vehicle. They could drive up and get their ballot. Election judges would come to their car. This was actually used quite a bit on election day by people who tested positive for COVID in those 5 days before the election when they could no longer get a vote by mail ballot. Some county clerks made arrangements so that voters could drive up, crack their window, receive their ballot, sign it, and vote it without having contact with any election judges. So the upshot of that, though, was that a lot of things in 2020 were put into place that had been discussed for many years. A lot of people had wanted to expand vote by mail for some time. A lot of people had wanted to, for example, make the election day in November, the first Tuesday in November, a school holiday so that schools could be used as polling places without disrupting classroom operations. And a lot of those things were put into that bill. And some of those things have now been made permanent. The curbside voting is now something that all election authorities are allowed to use if they want to. What was recently passed and signed into law through our General Assembly allows county clerks to create for voters, if a voter wants to be placed on a permanent vote by mail list where you sign up as a voter, you will always get a ballot. You'll always get an application for a vote by mail ballot every election. It'll come to you. You can fill it out, send it back in, and then you will get your vote by mail ballot if that's what you want. So a lot of what we do here is involved with helping the local election authorities implement the laws that come out of Springfield. And of course, we also help when that legislation is drafted. We have a legislative director here who works with the lawmakers and with the county clerks. We try to facilitate if a lawmaker has an idea for an election reform, like expanding vote by mail. We then listen to the concerns of the local election authorities and communicate those to the lawmakers so that the law that gets passed is something that can be implemented by the local election authorities. So essentially though, when you go to your polling place, when you register to vote, that's all handled by the local election authority. I should point out one more thing that our voting and registration systems division is responsible for, and that is administering our online registration portal, which is officially called the paperless online voting application. If you go to elections.il.gov, right there on the front page, as soon as you get there, you can click on a tab that takes you directly to an online voter application, and you can register to vote online anytime in Illinois. You can also check your registration status to make sure that you're current. Our division, our voting and registrations systems division also helped in the implementation of automatic voter registration, which began 3 years ago, so that now when you go to get your driver's license renewed, if you've moved, you can automatically have your new address on your driver's license, update your voting registration as well. So I want to encourage anyone who's on this call. We have National Voter Registration Day coming up in 2 weeks on September 28th. You do not need to wait until that day. Go to elections.il.gov as soon as you can. If you're not registered, get registered. If you are not sure whether or not your current address is on your voter registration, you can check it there, but go do that now. The other thing is, in Illinois, if you're 17 years old, but you'll be 18 on or before the next general election, you can register to vote as a 17-year-old. So keep that in mind if you have any 17-year-olds or soon to be 17-year-olds in your house. I think the participants in this panel probably are all 18 and over, but something to keep in mind. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jim Madigan.
Thank you, Matt. And I have I'm able to introduce Ami Gandhi. Ami, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, your position and title, and then tell us what is the important information that our audience should know about your role and your office's role in the election process.
Thank you so much, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks so much for the chance to be a part of this important conversation and event. I'm Ami Gandhi, and I am a senior counsel at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Our organization has been working for more than 50 years to advance racial equity and economic opportunity for all, particularly in areas like voting rights, education equity, and community development and housing. I have the privilege of leading our organization's work on voting rights in Illinois and Indiana. And we believe that the right to vote is fundamental to a healthy democracy. Our team works to prevent barriers to voting and civic participation, especially in communities of color and low-income communities, to ensure that every eligible citizen is able to have access to voting and make their voices heard. We advocate for stronger laws and policies, provide comprehensive nonpartisan voter protection during elections. We provide training and community education. And as a last resort when needed, we do pursue litigation to enforce and defend voter access laws. The title of today's event, Voting Laws, Suppression, or Avoiding Fraud, is really thought-provoking. And I want to set forth for you how we view the issue and the three main ways that we tackle it through our election protection work, court litigation when needed, and community-based policy reform and legal reform. As a basic matter, it's important to reflect on this country's founding, when elections were set up for only white land-owning men to be able to vote. And despite our incredible progress locally and nationally over the decades to expand the franchise, the racist roots of the system unfortunately still continue to show up in our elections, leading to large gaps in voter registration and turnout that, especially even to this day, even in Illinois, still impact Black and brown voters, low-income voters, non-English speaking citizens, and voters with disabilities, among others. In Illinois, even in the year 2021, unfortunately, voter registration rates for voters of color lag behind those of white voters, and specifically when you compare citizens of different races. Voters living in entirely Black areas on average must wait longer at the polls in line as compared to voters living in areas with no Black residents. The term voter suppression often brings to mind anti-voter laws that make national news, like voter ID laws, unfair voter purges, or Georgia's ban on giving away water or food to voters within a certain distance of polling sites. And these laws do unfortunately have the effect of suppressing the votes of non-white community members. Closer to home in Illinois, we've observed that voters of color often face more subtle and multi-layered barriers and situations and circumstances that may be harms that were not intended, where an unexpected change in a polling location or a language barrier for citizens who are in the process of learning English can mean the difference between whether an eligible voter casts a ballot or ends up having their voice taken away from them. This is why we take it very seriously when we see election officials, if we see election officials creating unnecessary roadblocks between the voters and access to the ballot. And we also take it seriously when election officials are trying earnestly to address voter access barriers that come up and because of challenges with resources or other types of support that election officials deserve and need. If anything is getting in the way of their ability to help and support voters, we would of course be concerned about that as well. In every election, I want to turn to talk about election protection briefly. In every election, we partner with the nonpartisan National Election Protection Network to support voters in Illinois and Indiana over the phone and in person. We staff a hotline called 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-OUR-VOTE. And then we also go in person to do nonpartisan poll watching at locations identified as high priority by community contacts. And every election, from national presidential elections to Chicago neighborhoods, local school council elections, or school board elections in suburban communities, We hear from voters who face a problem accessing their fundamental right to vote. And our goal is to troubleshoot with them on the spot before it's too late, before voting closes for the day, often working really collaboratively and constructively with election officials to get voters' problems resolved. And we use the data from these experiences with voters to drive our litigation and policy reform initiatives. In the 2020 election, which you've heard a lot about, and you've probably spent a lot of time thinking about it, we saw how Illinois voters, despite facing many challenges, had better options than they had in the past to vote in healthy, secure, and accessible ways because of legislation that helped promote vote by mail and expanded other options that people need in order to be able to vote. As a last resort, when we have to resort to litigation, we are able to do that, partnering with private law firms and attorneys on our staff to file briefs and lawsuits when necessary to prevent disenfranchisement. For example, in August 2020, just months before the presidential election last year, the Cook County Republican Party and the Liberty Justice Center filed a lawsuit to try to block Illinois' expanded vote by mail law. They argued without evidence that the provisions in the law would lead to widespread voter fraud. And we joined with the Just Democracy Illinois Coalition to file an amicus brief in opposition, basically supporting the position of the state of Illinois and saying that these laws are sound. Our brief cites multiple safeguards in place to prevent potential voter fraud. And actually our bipartisan Illinois State Board of Elections has published data showing that suspected incidents of voter fraud constitute only a couple thousandths of a single % of the votes cast in the state. And thankfully, the federal court judge agreed and ruled that the claims in this lawsuit amounted to unsupported speculation about voter fraud. And last but not least, our organization engages in community-based policy advocacy to proactively expand and strengthen our democracy. We are really privileged to work with incarcerated and returning community members who are interested in voting rights and civic engagement. We helped write and pass the Illinois Civics in Prison Law, which requires in-person peer-led education for incarcerated Illinois community members who are preparing to re-enter society and reclaim their voting rights. And those changes like that in our system would address the current racial injustices in our election system while promoting positive, constructive ways that we can all participate in our society. Thank you so much for hearing me out, getting a flavor of the kind of work that we do at Chicago Lawyers Committee. I want to ask Jim a few questions now and would really like to hear from your point of view, Jim. Can you please tell us your title and your role and tell us what you think it's important for all of us to learn from you about the election process from your perspective?
Thank you, Ami. As the introduction said, I am a retired librarian. I spent 25 years as the deputy director in Oak Park. And as such, I was very involved in the elections process as the person who dealt with elections taking place at our 3 locations in Oak Park where elections were held. And also in many other things, dealing with elected board members. I personally think that libraries are really an excellent institution as far as that is concerned. So far today, there's been a lot of great discussion about the very serious problem of the suppression of citizens being able to vote. And frankly, as Jean demonstrated, Illinois is doing a pretty good job of ensuring that people do have the opportunity to vote. I'm going to shift the discussion slightly and pick up on some of the ideas that I think that Ami has just raised. And I want to talk about the suppression of voter choices. And briefly, what that means is that the two major parties collaborate in a variety of ways to ensure that there are as few possible choices for voters to choose from. And when I say as few choices as possible, I mean not more than two choices and often only one choice. So let's just take a step back and look at a report issued by the Pew Research Center on November 3rd, 2020. The title is U.S. Trails Most Developed Countries in Voter Turnout. And it's important to note in this report that the Pew Research Center is measuring and comparing the number of voting age population, not the percentage of registered voters. It shows that there are many US citizens who totally abstain from the election process. Last fall, the presidential election drew the highest number and percentage of voters in recent times. And yet, that was about 2/3 of eligible voters. We might ask, why is the United States in 30th place out of 35 developed countries in voter turnout? Why don't more people participate in the election process? The literature on voting lists many reasons, including voting on Tuesdays, the pervasive thinking that voting doesn't make a difference, the length of the campaign season, money in politics. I acknowledge all of these, and I'd like to add the lack of choices. Looking at other countries, most countries have 3 or 4 major parties, plus minor parties. 4 parties is twice the number of choices as in the United States. Well, what are some of the laws that enforce a 2-party system? In Illinois, there's 3 ways to run for office: as a candidate for an established political party, as an independent, or as a write-in. For statewide elections, such as president or governor, established parties hold primaries, and a candidate is required to get as little as 3,000 to 5,000 votes in that primary. Independents and new parties, and I put new in quotations, are required to obtain 25,000 signatures from registered voters. If you ask any candidate who has done that, collecting signatures is time-consuming and expensive. And second, because it's likely that an established candidate will challenge some signatures, the rule of thumb is to collect twice as many signatures as required. Remember, if one signature on a page of 20 is found to be invalid, the entire page is disallowed. Since 2008, both the Green Party and the Libertarian parties have collected enough signatures to be on the ballot for each presidential election in Illinois. And yet, each continues to be classified as a new party. Each election cycle, the way this system works drains third-party energies so that their energy is devoted to putting candidates on the ballot, not running a campaign. A simple change in the definition of new and established parties would lead to more choices in Illinois. So as a retired librarian, I like stories. And so here are several. In 2020, in Wisconsin, Green Party activists were collecting signatures to put their candidates on the ballot for president and vice president. Halfway through the process, the vice presidential candidate, Angela Walker, who was an African-American woman who had previously lived in Milwaukee and had run for office of sheriff and got 20% of the vote, running as an independent socialist. She changed her address. The Green Party activists asked the Wisconsin Board of Elections what to do, and they were told, well, correct the address on the new petitions. So when the petitions were turned in, the Democratic Party of Wisconsin sued to toss the Green Party off of the ballot. And the Wisconsin Election Board denied the Green Party ballot status on a party line vote, which was then upheld by the Supreme Court of Wisconsin due not to the issues, but due to the timing of mail-in ballots being having to be printed and mailed out. Most articles included information that the Green Party presidential vote in Wisconsin in 2016 exceeded the margin of Donald Trump's victory, and that the Democratic Party chose to reduce voter choice in hopes of winning the election. This isn't the only example. In Pennsylvania, in 2020, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in a party line vote, reversed a lower court opinion and tossed the Green Party off the Pennsylvania presidential ballot. The Associated Press ended their report with, quote, "Democrats have long gone to court to keep Green Party candidates off the ballot." Also in 2020, after Texas had passed a $5,000 filing fee for candidates running for the Senate, the Green Party sued, and before that suit was heard, Texas Democrats sued to keep the Green Party off the ballot. Now, they were unsuccessful. And it's important to know that the Texas Republican Party at the very same time sued to prevent 44 Libertarian Party candidates from appearing on the ballot for the same reason. They also were unsuccessful. Unfortunately, there's a pattern of Democrats and Republicans suing to prevent third party from appearing on the ballot, a pattern of suppressing voter choice. So we need new laws protecting the rights of voters and including the rights of voter choice. And I ask our audience today to consider the elimination of all ballot access laws that discriminate against opposition parties. That we need free and equal time on television and radio for all ballot qualified candidates. That we should have fully public funded campaign financing for every federal, state, and local office through a clean money, clean elections model. That we should pass a Fair Representation Act that was introduced in 2018 and in 2019, which would establish multi-seat proportional representation so that the vast majority of voters would be represented in Congress. We need ranked choice voting in federal and statewide elections. We need a prohibition on corporate spending to influence elections. And finally, we need the restoration and the strengthening of the Federal Voting Rights Act. I believe you are not protecting democracy if you are silencing political opponents. Thank you. And now, let's go back to Robert Moorhead.
Thank you for the great discussions, from the presentations from each of our panelists. Sorry, I got caught up in the discussion, like, oh, I have to talk now. I was engaged. And so I want to take this opportunity to share some of the sorry, a little distracted. I've got too many screens going on and all these presentations here. I want to encourage questions from our audience, and please, it's helpful if you have a question that's specifically directed to one of the panelists, and you could indicate that in your question. And make a note that, we're tying our discussion here to the 5 constitutional amendments that are related to voting, the 15th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, and 26th amendments. I don't know if people knew there was math was involved here, but specific list of amendments here. And our Q&A will be addressed to Matt, Ami, Jim, and Jessica, Stechniak, who has joined us, who will be answering on behalf of the county clerk's office. And so I'm going to be making my way through the questions in the Q&A. So at the top of the list is if someone could please explain the process for someone registering to vote. And if one of you wants to be the one to leap in and answer the question, then please feel free to do so.
Just from our point of view, the process here that I always recommend is start by going to our website and registering online. Now, as far as I suspect this question has to do with validating the voter's information, and so I would look to Jessica and Jean probably to talk more about that.
Yes, so to register, they can go online, as Matt mentioned. They can also get registered through a registrar or through the mail or at the DMV. And as far as verifying information, we have access to the Secretary of State, and we can verify that somebody's driver's license is their driver's license and they're registered at the address they say they're at according to their driver's license. And we can also verify that a person's social security number matches their current name.
Okay. Next question. This one is directed for Matt. Can you please explain the state approval process of election equipment that can be used in Illinois?
I could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon on that because it is a very, very intricate process. But basically, any voting systems and any voting equipment that's used within those systems has to be first approved at the federal level before it comes to us. And then we conduct testing here to make sure that primarily that voting tabulators can read multiple ballot styles, because what a lot of voters don't take into consideration is that even in, for example, I'm talking here from Springfield, which is in Sangamon County. We have about 150,000 registered voters here, a mid-sized county as Illinois goes, but there are roughly 200 different ballot styles throughout our county that, depending on where you live, you may have a different school district candidate, park district, all kinds of different things. So what our Division of Voting and Registration Systems does is, before it approves anything for use, the equipment has to go through rigorous testing to make sure that it's reading everything accurately. But mainly what voters need to be aware of is that there is a statutorily required pre-election testing that is done publicly, where the parties, the state's attorney, others are notified, and they are there for the pre-election testing. Then there is post-election testing, where we conduct a 5% random retabulation statewide. It's run by us. We tell the county clerks and boards of election which 5% of ballots they need to rerun to make sure that they are that everything was perfectly accurate. That, in a nutshell, is the testing process. It's very, very rigorous, and Jean and Jessica could probably talk more about what they do in their office to make sure that everything is running perfectly. But that's basically how it works.
Thank you for the very detailed reply. Next question is, how can fraud in the voting process be determined, specifically in the process pertaining to mail-in voting?
So for our mail-in voting, what we do is we verify signatures against each other. So the signature we have on file for a voter, the signature that they send in on their vote by mail application, and the signature they send in on their vote by mail ballot are all checked against one another to make sure they match. And so that's how we verify a vote by mail ballot. And also through the ballot ID number that's printed on each vote by mail ballot. So when each ballot is sent out, there's a ballot number attached to that voter. And if for some reason a ballot is destroyed in the mail, or a person doesn't get their ballot in the mail, we can send out a new one and void that first ballot ID number. So if it was found by somebody and returned we would know that that ballot ID number was voided and a new one was sent.
In the 2020 election bill, there were a whole new set of standards that were established just for that. You had to have a panel of judges that checked the signatures. If there was a problem with the voter's signature, there was a requirement that the voter be notified immediately so that either they could somehow rectify that, or a new ballot would be issued if there was a problem. But the signature is really key to the whole thing.
I know I've always felt a degree of pressure at that moment when you're signing the ballot. You have to sign it similarly to, like, if you keep that hand flexible and your dexterity going. The next question is,
Can I say something about that? We have
please,
a lot
Joanna.
of voters contact us about that kind of stress. And one thing that I think that was helpful is when election authorities in Illinois made it clear in last year's election, that if you need to update your signature on file, there are ways for voters to do that. Plan ahead, ask the questions you have so that you can still feel comfortable about a secure process with integrity, but also my signature has changed over time. I know other people's have as well. And so it's great that in Illinois, there's a process that kind of anticipates those sorts of things so that people can still have access, but there can still be security around it.
Thanks, Ami. We have a question about voting by mail, the vote by mail permanently option. If someone signs up for vote by mail permanently, how do you validate that in future years that person remains a valid voter? Maybe the person died or moved out of state.
So we do run voter verification every 2 years. We send out a notice to every registered voter in DuPage County. And if we do not receive something back from the post office, or somebody else may be living at that address, that that person's moved or died, we just have to basically assume that person still lives there, which can unfortunately cause problems when people throw them out once they get them. If you have an old or the old person that owned the house got the notice and then threw it out, we're still assuming that person lives there. So that can cause a problem. However, like I said before, the signature verification is really where it's going to come down. So if you tried to vote for somebody who had a permanent vote by mail application at your house and they've since moved, we would catch that in the voter signature verification.
Looking over the questions here and seeing how I can combine multiple, because there are a lot of questions related to mail-in ballots, including how do we know that it was used by the person it was intended for, and you've answered that regarding sort of the signature matches, and talked a bit about the process for handling mail-in voting. Outside of voter fraud cases that have been caught, can you speak to how many suspected yet unproven cases of voter fraud have been estimated?
I do not have any numbers on that for statewide. I know in our county, we sent about 10 over to the state's attorneys to be looked at. And they're going ahead with ongoing prosecution for 7 of them.
And I know that this isn't something that we track at the state level, but I do know that after the 2016 general election, we did do a review, and out of about 6 million votes cast, we ended up referring 65 possible cases of double voting to state's attorneys for review. I'm not aware that any of those resulted in prosecution, and we know that many of the votes that were initially identified as being potential double votes, which would be fraud, were simply person had the same name, that they were cleared up very quickly. But there were 65 that we ended up referring out to state's attorneys, 65 out of 6 million. And again, as far as we know, there were no prosecutions from those. So that's all I can add to that.
Yeah, the 65 out of how many, I think, is a really important point. It gives us a sense of the proportion of votes that we're talking about here. We have a question about procedures that are in place to ensure that homeless voters have a safe and easy voting experience.
Yeah, homeless voters are, there are provisions in the election code for the process for them registering. It can be to a homeless shelter. I believe some of them may use PO boxes, I'm not sure. Jessica or Jean may be able to answer that more clearly, because we don't do the actual registrations, but I do know that that's addressed in the election code specifically.
Right, so they can register to, like you said, a homeless shelter. And they can also register to someone's house if they know, like, a family member or somebody that they can register to. We don't allow registering to PO boxes because we don't have ballots set up for a PO box. And so then they'll use somebody else's address, like a parent or maybe a friend, and they will vote through that residential address. And they will just go to that that polling place, or they could early vote. They could request to vote by mail, and if that person's willing to get it to the homeless person, they can vote that way as well.
Every election, we do have homeless voters call us through our hotline, 866 Our Vote, or contacting us through nonpartisan community organizations. And even if they're trying to use election day registration or other forms of registration access, the Illinois law does provide for ways for community members to get registered if they're otherwise eligible, even if they're homeless or are in a situation where their address is in transition. And it's really important. It comes up, for example, we had a group of community members who were eligible voters at a rehab facility who were really interested in getting civically engaged and having their voices heard. And we were able to help them through connecting with the local election authority, get their questions satisfactorily answered so that they were able to register and vote.
Next up, a question. I see that Jim might be typing an answer to it, but I kind of want to open it up for the whole panel too. And thank you, Jim, for joining in with the Q&A. Regarding asking what's the reasoning behind limiting or forbidding voting for felons after release?
That's Illinois doesn't limit voting for felons after release. Even if you're released and you are paroled or you're on probation, you can still vote. As long as you are not incarcerated, you can vote. Illinois is not one of the states that takes away the right to vote from convicted felons.
It's important to remember that historically, the basis for the laws that took away voting power from community members who have been part of the criminal legal system or who have incarceration as part of their life story, those laws were set up the way that they were to disenfranchise Black people, to take political power away from predominantly Black and brown population who's incarcerated. And so there are not sound safety reasons, for example, to deprive incarcerated or returning community members from voting. And in fact, having avenues for positive forms of civic engagement and learning who your government official is, who the candidates are, learning about the issues, those have actually been shown to be really helpful as people are looking to get integrated into their communities and have positive outlets, positive things to do. And so while we've seen some helpful aspects of voter access in Illinois, there can be even more in the days ahead to really reckon with the fact that the disenfranchisement of incarcerated community members really came from our country's history of racism.
I also wanted to just mention that in DuPage County, we work with our sheriff's department, and we work to get the people being held in the county jail who have not yet been convicted. We work with them to get them vote by mail ballots so that they can participate in every election.
Jim, were you going to join in too? It looked like you were.
I only wanted to say that in my response, and I really appreciated what Jessica just said, and also what Ami said in terms of the history. I was recalling that Michael Moore has a documentary in which he is interviewed. He's in a prison in Norway, and politicians actually come to the prison in order to campaign, because merely being convicted of a crime does not take away your right to vote. And I think that that is an ideal that we should be striving for.
Okay, we have a specific question here regarding a local election. I'm hoping the garbage truck right outside my window isn't going to make too much noise here. The challenges of working from home in a pandemic. I'm going to try to direct this question to Jessica, if I may. The question is, can someone comment on the last Glendale Heights election where mail-in votes weren't counted due to a legal challenge regarding candidate signature totals? Specifically, what action can citizens and officials take to ensure votes cast by mail will be counted no matter what?
So I can't really speak to that as I'm not a lawyer involved in it. I can just tell you that for that Glendale Heights race, the candidate was determined by a judge to not qualify to be on the ballot. And that happened at a time after we had had ballots printed, so their names still appeared and people still thought they could write it in or they could vote for that person. So that is the reason those votes weren't counted, is because the judge had said that, and it was only that race that wasn't, that the votes weren't counted for just that individual. So that's the reason, because the judge had determined they didn't qualify to be on the ballot, but everything had already been printed up. It was at a late date that the judge determined that.
Another question was that Senator Mitch McConnell has stated that the federal government should not intervene in state elections. How has the federal government impacted elections in the past?
I think one way that the federal government impacted recent elections here in Illinois is that they provide funding through the Help America Vote Act. And we were able to use that here to establish a program known as the Cyber Navigator program, which helps local election authorities ensure that they have all the cybersecurity resources that we have at the state level and that some of the large jurisdictions like the Chicago Board of Elections already has, in order to reassure voters that their voting registration information is safe with us, and hopefully to dispel some of the noise that we hear about our elections being vulnerable to cyber attacks and cyber generated fraud. That's one way. That's actually the main way as far as the State Board of Elections is concerned.
I think that's a great point of, and a reminder about how these different systems fit together. I also want to mention that some of our very basic fundamental voter protections that are in place are through federal laws, such as the Federal Voting Rights Act. And it has played a really important role historically and to this day in ensuring that there is a mechanism for eligible voters of color to have their rights protected. And it was enacted during a time when that couldn't be taken for granted in the 1960s. And certainly to this day, there still are threats and disproportionate barriers and obstacles that voters of color face, Black voters and other voters of color. And so unfortunately, the need for those federal basic civil rights protections hasn't gone away yet.
Okay, I have a question asking, why does the US require its citizens to register to vote when there are clearly other, far better ways of accomplishing higher voter turnout? Why are we made to go through additional steps to vote when the DMV already has all the information needed for us to be able to cast a vote?
Mainly, now that a couple of things in that question, talking about the Department of Motor Vehicles And yes, when you get your driver's license in Illinois, you are automatically registered to vote unless you tell them otherwise. And yes, that does provide that the Secretary of State's office does have your information there. However, registration is necessary because we all vote in a specific precinct in Illinois. Ideally, there are roughly 800 people per precinct. And the importance of that is that when you go and get your ballot on election day, I mentioned earlier about all the different ballot styles that even a small county may have to deal with. Your precinct determines who you vote for maybe your city alderman, or perhaps a park district representative, your school board representative. Those are unique to your precinct based on where you live, based on the block where you live. So your election authority needs to know exactly who gets what ballot when they go into the polling place to vote, so that they get the appropriate candidates to vote for. So that's what the registration process is all about. And I should add that really Illinois has worked very hard to make the registration part of voting as easy and as transparent as possible. In many cases, you could go in to get your driver's license renewed, and it's just a matter of answering yes to the question of do you want us to update your voting registration, and you're there. So but it is an important part. It's important that we track who the voters are, and so that we know when they move, that they can be canceled in one jurisdiction, when they're added in another jurisdiction. All of those things are very important.
I should say that I have lived overseas quite a bit, and was years ago helping to register American citizens to vote absentee, I think in the '96 presidential election. I'm dating myself here. And was surprised, again, having a big thick federal book of how to register people to vote in all these different states and using a single federal form. But the variety of rules in so many different states, how the registration process varied across the country. Some people could only register by turning in their form in a consulate or in an embassy. Other people had to be administered an oath, or maybe they could administer the oath themselves, I guess, by looking into a mirror or something. And some states were really simple, just sign the form and turn it in. And so there was I appreciate the greater ease with which voters can get registered here in Illinois, and how much more complicated it can be in other states. I'm going to be trying to combine a few questions here, noting that requests that, wanting it to be clear that fraud's not really a problem in Illinois, that there are a number of processes in place to safeguard our elections, kind of wanting our panelists to kind of emphasize that point. And asking how can we better increase the feeling that elections aren't stolen, that they are the will of the voters. My list has scrolled, had a few in here related to that. So kind of what steps can we take to kind of reinforce this, I think maybe the greater trust that people have regarding our voting system?
Well, we've already talked about the testing of the actual machinery that's used when you cast your ballot and put it into a tabulator. Those are tested before and after the election. I think, and there are just so many aspects to this that have started in the 2020 election cycle, and really, I guess, in the 2016 election cycle, that never were part of the discussion in American elections before. This idea that fraud is rampant. One of the things that we hear quite a bit, and that I take questions on as in my job here at the state level, is the idea that non-citizens are voting en masse. And I have to explain over and over again that, number one, that's not happening because they're not being registered, because as Jessica had explained earlier, there is a process for checking citizenship status of every registration. But number two, what people need to understand is that an undocumented immigrant in the United States does not want to wave a red flag to bring government scrutiny on them. If that individual ever hopes to apply for citizenship, the first thing that's going to be checked by the ICE is whether that person has voted, whether that person registered to vote. That can be instant deportation if an undocumented, if a non-citizen registers to vote, and especially if they vote, that is instant deportation. So there is massive incentive for any undocumented immigrants to not vote. So, but no matter how much we repeat that, it only seems to amplify the other side. But that is something that I wish voters would keep in mind. That and the idea that the equipment that you put when you put your paper ballot through that tabulator at your polling place, or when your ballot comes in through the mail and is put through a tabulator at your county clerk's office, that piece of equipment has never been connected to the internet. Cyber hackers cannot access that from outside and change votes in those. So, and that is something that we are working on constantly to make sure doesn't happen. But what people do need to realize is that when we talk about election interference from foreign countries, we're talking about the way that they manipulate social media to get to you, the voter, to get inside your head. That is a problem. That's something that we're always trying to combat. But voters need to realize that all of the discussion right now that you're hearing about voter fraud and millions of illegals voting is just not happening. It's difficult for us to prove something that doesn't happen, but that's where we're at right now, unfortunately. And you're going to hear a lot about that as we get into the 2022 election cycle. We'll probably be doing a whole lot more. We had a big ad campaign during COVID about vote by mail. We may do the same thing in the 2022 cycle and beyond about the reality of the security of elections and how your vote is counted.
One of the foremost advocates for an effective and secure voter registration process in Illinois, including guarding against inadvertent registration of non-citizens, is Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Our immigrant communities themselves don't want to see non-citizens accidentally caught up in registration or in any way caught up in voter registration. As Matt articulated, the consequences of that are dire for our families and our communities, those of us who come from immigrant communities. And it takes just a little bit of asking around to talk to people who are personally affected by these issues to know that our immigrant communities have no interest in taking part in activities that are going to subject us to the risk of deportation and other repercussions. Deportation is real under all presidential administrations, and it has been a consequence of voter registration and voter participation by non-citizen community members. And it's been really important in Illinois that voters, nonpartisan advocacy organizations, and the government officials themselves who do the hard work of putting on our elections are in communication to try to improve these systems as much as possible. So that makes me really proud to be part of the voting conversation in Illinois, where there's this constant effort to try to improve the systems.
We have some questions related to a point that Jim made in his presentation, related to the number of signatures that are required for someone to get on the ballot, particularly if it's a new political party. And the questions are, I guess, asking for a clarification on the specific number of signatures, and maybe we could clarify whether that's for whether it matters whether it's a city position, county, or statewide, and what the constitutional basis could be for requiring a number of signatures for someone to get on the ballot.
Well, in Illinois, if you're running for a statewide office, which is U.S. Senator, Governor, et cetera, for a Democrat or Republican, for an established party, you need 5,000 signatures. And if you're running as an independent or a new party candidate, you need at least 25,000 signatures. Now, when you get into the numbers for running for state rep and state senate, those vary depending. They don't vary for the Democrats and Republicans. You need 500 signatures for established parties to run for state rep, 1,000 to run for state senate. You'll need typically 6, 7, 8 times that many if you're running as a independent or a new party candidate, because those numbers are factored by the total gubernatorial vote in the previous gubernatorial election. Now, here is why it's not constitutionally based, it's based in statute. The logic behind the higher signature barrier is that someone who is running in a new party or as an independent candidate skips the primary and goes directly to the general election. So in exchange for that, they have to collect a higher number of signatures because they're going directly on to the November election ballot. Now, the way that I saw the question mentioned that they couldn't believe that the Green Party isn't established in Illinois. The Green Party was established in Illinois at one time. In the 2006 gubernatorial election, the Green Party candidate got over 5% of the total vote statewide. By state law, if a new party candidate for governor gets 5% or more of the vote statewide, that party is established for the next 2 even year elections. So the Green Party was established for 2008 elections and then again for the 2010. So they could put on their all candidates statewide for the Green Party were guaranteed a spot in the primary. But what happened in 2010 was that the Green Party did not get that 5% again, so they went back to being a new party. They were not established. If they were to field a candidate in 2022 for governor who gains 5% of the vote, then they'll be established for the next 2. Same with the Libertarian Party. There was a party, the Conservative Party, in the 2018 election for governor. They came close to the 5% threshold. I think they may have gotten it here or there. In a congressional district, if someone from a new party like the Green Party runs for Congress and within that district gets 5%, then that party is established in that district going forward for the next 2 elections. But you got to maintain 5% or you go back to being new party status. That's in statute. And again, the main logic behind it, and again, the state board doesn't make these laws. We only we interpret it and administer them. But the logic is that you as an independent or new party candidate are being allowed to get directly onto the November ballot. Therefore, you have a higher signature threshold.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I think that was well said, and that is the logic. And what I'm saying is that there's a counter logic, and that is that it may be that what we want is for many people as possible to vote and participate in our system, and to have a definition. And Robert, you may have noticed that the person who asked the question expressed surprise that the Libertarians and the Green Party are considered new parties. Maybe people think that being on the ballot time after time after time is indicative of a mature, established party, regardless of what the statute says. And I'm saying that the statute doesn't match the reality of wanting more people to participate and to be represented.
We are approaching the end of our time, so I'm going to try to kind of combine a few questions here, especially some that seem related. And some of this I think these questions are reflecting a bit more nationally, a specific legislations that have been passed related to voting, and not so much necessarily related to Illinois. But the questions are, how are restricting early and mail-in voting and reducing poll hours justified, especially while we're still in the middle of a global pandemic? With these restrictions being implemented, how are voters expected to truly be able to vote? What steps are they taking in order to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to vote? And if I could throw in one more that just came up on the screen, but I think it's gone now, is that, what if people have concerns regarding these different restrictions on voting, what should they be calling their congressional representatives about? What concerns should they be raising the most? I realize I just threw a lot at you, so feel free to pick apart, take out one piece maybe to address it.
Well, Illinois is, we allow 40 days before every election for early voting. The last two election bills have granted local election authorities a lot of freedom in terms of expanding their hours for conducting early voting. And then obviously we just talk a lot about how we've expanded vote by mail, curbside voting. So, Illinois really is, when we hear about things going on in other states, Texas and Georgia were big in the news. A lot of those you can take what they did and flip it around, and the opposite is what's operating in Illinois now.
I think it's helpful to question for all of us to question our presumptions about who should and shouldn't be able to vote. And just like certain types of exclusions were commonplace in our country's past and in Illinois' past. And if we want to dismantle that type of racism of our government systems, we really have to be willing to take a look at the fairness behind excluding certain people from our voting system. But right now, one of the initiatives we are advocating for is re-enfranchisement in the future of community members who are in prison. It's not a part of the law yet in Illinois, but we don't see a good reason why there shouldn't be more enfranchisement of citizens in this country and in Illinois in particular.
We are at the end of our time period here, and we certainly have had more questions coming in than we have time to answer. I think it reflects the large public interest in ensuring the safety and security of our voting systems, and that everyone is able to act on their right to vote and have their voice heard. I want to appreciate the effort, the work from our panelists here in sharing their expertise and giving us an informed discussion and kind of helpfully stepping outside the anger and vitriol and politics that have been part of this. And I think one of our interim chair, Mark Rudisill, mentioned this as a bipartisan discussion. I think this has been a nonpartisan discussion. That we're focusing on people's rights and seeing how that people can act upon their right to vote and do it safely and securely and know that with confidence that their vote has been counted. So I want to again thank our speakers for joining us today and our Constitution Day committee and our audience for navigating our technical difficulties early on in our presentation. It's a lot easier if you can set people in a room and kind of sit and talk, but now that we're doing this across the internet and multiple devices, navigating the chat and the Q&A and all this stuff, sometimes problems occur. We do appreciate everyone's patience in coming through this, and thank you again. And don't miss Julia DiLiberti's presentation on Friday and the COD voter registration event coming up later this month. Thank you again.